It's amazing to take the big step back and view the progress of music during the 19th century. When you consider the early 1800s, the first Viennese school with Beethoven as the driving force, and compare it with the early 20th century and the second Viennese school led by Arnold Schoenberg, the contrast, as you would imagine, is startling. We all know Beethoven, the true voice of early Romanticism. And Schoenberg, the voice of modernism and dissonance. If some of you suspect a little foul play on my part, yes, you're right. The first excerpt was Schoenberg, and the second was Beethoven from his Third Symphony, which we will now examine in detail. And Schoenberg, of course, would go on to write much more complicated music from what you heard there. But it's Beethoven now who would begin his ascent as the single most powerful, titanic, visionary musical force of the day, perhaps of all time. This concept of Romanticism during Beethoven's time, this is very central, and it's not just the I'm in a romantic mood sort of thing. This was a major cultural movement that bridged the 18th and 19th centuries and swept European society along with it. During the Age of Enlightenment, as you will recall, the role of music in society was basically as entertainment for the royalty. Music as an artist's own personal expression or a statement. That's just not how things were done. Haydn, after all, was forced to sit at the table with the servants and groundskeepers and whatnot during his time at the Esterhazy Palace. But the role of the artist was now changing in this new age of Romanticism. The Swiss philosopher Rousseau claimed that man must free himself from the constraints of society and get in touch with his inner self. Feelings and emotions and individual expression were now regarded as superior to reason and logic. So Beethoven basically accepted his oncoming deafness. It empowered him to embark on his new path. He's an artist charged with a lofty, important mission in life, and this was all entirely new. Now here is some exciting music for you to listen to. This is not music by Beethoven, but music of Etienne Méhul, a French composer of the day whose big public choral works were favorites in revolutionary France. This work, his Song of Departure, was actually preferred to La Marseillaise by Napoleon himself. In this great revolutionary spirit in France and the rise of Napoleon as the great liberator sent shockwaves to the crowned heads of the Habsburg Empire, but waves of excitement to the people with hope for a new era of peace, justice, and brotherhood. And the rise of public musical works in France was huge. Music could now be used as a social statement to lift and inspire the masses. I always thought that those big, massive choral orchestral works by Hector Berlioz were something that he just dreamed up, when in fact there were hundreds of works written on this grand scale during this period. Here is one of those works by Berlioz written some years after Beethoven's death. It was a government commission to celebrate the installation of the famous July column in the Place de la Bastille. So Beethoven now explores how this rousing, heroic idiom might propel symphonic music beyond its technical concert hall limitations into something more all-encompassing and perhaps even spiritual in nature. Now talk about architecture. Beethoven now turns to the sonata form, with its built-in potential for drama, for musical conflict in the development section, which then resolves in the recapitulation. The sonata form now proves to be Beethoven's ideal blueprint for expanding the emotional power and the scope of his music because it provides such a solid technical framework to contain and control all of it. So now, starting right at the top, the standard formality, as we've seen, of beginning a symphony with a slow, majestic introduction, as we saw in Beethoven's first two symphonies. How would this new path deal with this formality? Well, how about this? There it is, problem solved. And those two thunderbolts from the full orchestra leave no doubt as to the dynamic power of Beethoven's new path. The official formula for beginning a symphony with a slow, majestic introduction has just been swept away. But beyond their shock effect, I feel that these two chords function in a very unique and conceptual way. If they are now really the introduction to this symphony, they should preview or they should summarize in advance the first movement in some way. And they do. They define both the harmony and the rhythm, the natural state of the music, its essence. Here. There is the basic harmonic cell of this movement, an E-flat major triad with all of its upward and downward extensions and whatnot. And much of the thematic material of this movement will derive from this simple E-flat triad. That is the harmonic basis of this movement. Then there is the rhythmic foundation of the movement, its tempo, its speed as it moves through time. And it's established by these two precisely equidistant chords, like huge rhythmic markers in a basic, brisk triple meter. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. So that's everything that you need there. The harmony, the vertical organization of the triad, and the rhythm, the horizontal organization of time, the music's meter. 1, 2, 2. So again, these two chords represent the natural state of the music within its own universe, or its stability. And we will soon see just how long the harmony and the rhythm remain stable. As I mentioned with the Second Symphony of Beethoven, I absolutely believe that his greatest works function on an abstract, ephemeral level that parallels the forces of nature in a way. And I'm not referring to the chirping birdies and the thunderstorms from the Sixth Symphony. So we will see now where things lead. As we continue, and you hear what just happened there. The main theme begins with the most fundamental or elemental material, a basic E-flat major triad in the cello with this lower extension, this, but at the slightest diversion from this triad, this, two things happen immediately. The harmony is destabilized by this note, and immediately the first violins are triggered. It's like a natural reaction with this breathless rhythmic figure. It's an irregular palpitation. It's an aberration of the normal rhythm pattern. If we had this, 1, 2, 3, but it isn't. Beethoven writes it on the offbeat, so it's like 1, to produce this odd and intense effect. So both the harmony and the rhythm have subtly been destabilized. The natural function of these elements is off. But let's see how Beethoven deals with it. And you see how the creator of this musical universe has resolved this brief disturbance and restored order. As perfect a resolution as you could possibly imagine. And this is only the first of the many examples of this process of destabilization and resolution that we will encounter. So now we will examine the overall architecture of this first movement, which represents a huge expansion of the classical sonata form, with a coda that is an event unto itself. So now moving along with the exposition, Beethoven extends the upward triad motive, like so. And we arrive now in the dominant key of B flat major, but immediately the harmonies become much more intense. But more importantly, as you'll hear, the rhythmic structure goes off the rails to the point where it's literally impossible to tell what's happening. But things then begin to readjust, and we perceive the regular triple meter coming back. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, even though there are no downbeats here. But again, let's just see how the master resolves this disruption. With a big restatement of his main theme. And we see now that its triadic simplicity contains some real potential as a heroic fanfare, wouldn't you say? And now we have a series of linking passages that lead us to the secondary group of materials, all in the dominant key of B flat major, as is standard. Now there are 3 of these linking themes. First one, very important, it's a gentle exchange between the woodwinds. Built on that rhythm, dum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, ba, which will become very important, so hang on to it. But underneath this gentle exchange, the cellos and basses were playing, sounds like rising triads, yes? Yes, the motive which will bind the entire movement together. Now, the second linking theme is this lovely and unexpectedly dolce, sweet phrase. It's this. Which Beethoven then will energize, and he builds it into our third linking passage. Very intense, and it's in the minor key with a new fleeting rhythmic figure, bum, ba-da-bum, 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 like so. And again, conflict descends upon the music, but listen how Beethoven resolves it as the music expands and soars. And that, if I am following Beethoven correctly, is the official secondary theme in the dominant key of B flat major. And it moves, as you heard, into the minor key, it becomes rather pensive, until Beethoven, thrilled, I am sure, at his command over his creation, now re-energizes, reanimates the music, starting from a whisper. And yet another transformation there of the basic triad motive, a robust and exuberant dance. And you hear it's all built on triads. And then this one, all triads, but more importantly, that rhythm. That's the rhythm I mentioned from that first little linking theme, which will become very important. Bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum. Again, now you will hear the music is plunged into tempest, and again, harmonic and rhythmic stability seem to collapse. And again, the music relaxes. So you see there's a continual pattern here of tension and release, instability and stability, with Beethoven in total control. But that upheaval in the rhythm that you just heard, with no downbeat in any measure, and these intense harmonies. 1, 1, 1. And as you heard, the rhythm then freezes. It's stuck in this pattern. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. I'm not making this up. That's exactly what's written. The notes don't change as you hear. They just repeat. They don't really matter. It's these strokes of rhythm and their division of time that is really important here. And what Beethoven has done in this passage, ingeniously, is to use a rhythmic device that's known as the hemiola. I know it sounds painful, but what it is, it's taking two measures of triple time with accents on the downbeat. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. All right? But now you compress the accents so that they come every 2 beats. So you get 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. Baroque composers use this hemiola device frequently, but usually they used it in slower, more sustained music. Here, Beethoven's hemiola threatens to throw the music into complete chaos until 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, until, as you heard, once again, things realign themselves with another version of the triad, the rising triad. And then the music relaxes for just a bit. There's one more final burst of power, culminating in another version of the triad figure. It's this. And crowned by these 4 hammered chords. Whoa! This startling cadence. It's actually built on a dominant 7th chord. Yes, but this note, the F, is raised to a G flat. And then it's all superimposed. We have this diminished 7th chord, which is great for intensity. Yeah, it's all superimposed now over the cadential B flat, so we get something like this. Let me see, my hands aren't big enough. Yeah, there it is. How much more could an audience be expected to take back in 1804 when this work was first premiered? And now the main triad theme, the first theme, is used as a transition. Etc. And the conductor now either chooses to repeat the entire exposition or to continue on into the central development section. We will repeat the exposition, and I will call out all of these events as they occur. The triad main theme is in the cellos. It strays. It triggers the first violins. But Beethoven resolves it. The rising triad theme is extended, and we move into the dominant key of B flat. And the hemiola disrupts the rhythm. We're now in a duple rhythm. Here's the triple rhythm back, and things are now back on track. Here is our first linking theme, triads in the bass. And that prominent rhythm, now in unison. And our second dolce theme, the linking theme. The energy level now increases. And our third linking theme. The intensity increases again, and the music soars. And here is our official secondary theme. And the harmonies darken. And Beethoven begins to reanimate the music. And here is our dance-like theme, all built on triads. And here's that important rhythmic figure. in the winds. The intensity builds again. And the rhythm is off the rails yet again. It freezes up. The hemiola figure. Here's the main theme, the triad. Yes, the music now relaxes. And once again, surges ahead. And more triads. And those four final chords. The main theme now as transition. And the development section begins. And the central development section now is also greatly expanded, not only in its length, but in its character and its design. It's like a grand fantasia, a movement unto itself. And I will focus on a few of its more astonishing moments. The development begins mysteriously, rather dark and ominous, with a variant of the triad theme. Like so. And we move into C major, and we hear the first of those three linking themes, the gentle one. With that all-important rhythm that I've mentioned. Then there's an episode with the third linking theme, the tempestuous one, with the cellos and basses playing the main theme in the minor key. Now, as we move deeper into the dramatic heart of this movement, Beethoven takes that first linking theme, the gentle one, and he extracts only the rhythm. Dum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, ba. And he uses this rhythm to drive what lies ahead. And this is very striking, what he's done here. The pitches are much less important now, much less important than the rhythm. And this rhythm, dum, bum, ba, bum, bum, ba, bum, will function almost like an element of nature. And Schoenberg and friends would adopt this device 100 years later. They called it the Hauptrhythm, or the main rhythm. They often wrote a piece or a scene of the opera Wozzeck, for instance, or Berg's violin concerto or whatnot, with a Hauptrhythm, a motive that was strictly a rhythm. And Beethoven does the same thing here 100 years earlier. First, he starts with a brief fugal passage based on this rhythm. Here is this miniature fugue, and listen to where it leads. The music is in turmoil. We've been led far afield from our tonic E-flat major into something resembling A minor. And with those diminished chords, the hallmark of dramatic intensity you hear in the 19th century, but it's this new rhythm. Here is the rhythm I've been talking about. Beethoven uses it simply with octaves. There's the rhythm. The pitches aren't really important, but it's thrown the music into a state of chaos, and the hemiola rhythm now also returns. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1. The octaves, and there's no way to stop it now. The boundaries of harmony and rhythm have burst, and the full force of Beethoven's visionary powers have been released. And that shocking music that I passed off as Schoenberg earlier in this episode, it is coming up with this chord. A series of relentless, grinding blows. Our rhythmic mooring is blown away, and we are left hurtling through the void. between this music and the music of Arnold Schoenberg is not at all unreasonable. 100 years later, the goal of the Second Viennese School to break down the traditional order of musical language had been set in motion in 1803 by Beethoven. And this Fantasia development section now continues, now with a completely new theme which appears out of nowhere. Actually, well, it appears out of Beethoven's imagination, of course. It is a plaintive and very soulful theme in its intensity. And the main theme there returns in C major. Now, the appearance of a totally new theme in a sonata's development section was not a totally new idea. Haydn's Farewell Symphony is number 45, was one past example. But the effect here, this haunting new melody appearing out of the ashes, as it were, of the preceding collapse, is remarkable. And think of the architectural plan here, the layout, how each of these clearly delineated sections or events, how they all function in Beethoven's design and his vision, which is always reaching further into the musical unknown, and which is about to reach its height. And after a passage that builds now on the main triad in its normal rhythm, combined underneath with a hemiola version of the triad in the bass. We now arrive in the key of C flat major, which is not too distant from our tonic E flat. And Beethoven will now begin to set up the return of the tonic key for the big recapitulation which is coming. Beethoven takes that upward triad of the theme. He uses it. It's a little cell. It's an element of nature, as it were. Here's how he handles this passage. Here's the motive. Diminished chord. Here it is. He isolates it. He compresses it. Here. He deconstructs it. There's just a bare outline now of the harmonies, and there's tension, there's hushed expectation. We have only this tremulous whisper in the violins. And just these two notes, the barest possible outline of this chord, right? The B flat, the seventh, the dominant chord. We know it must resolve to the tonic. That ancient law of tonal music now is drifting somewhere in the void with these two notes fluttering in the violins, and then it comes. In the second French horn, the main theme, distant but still heroic in character. And the orchestra sweeps. Wait. What just happened? Wait, what happened here? This. What's this? The dominant chord, which is clearly outlined here, right? It has not yet resolved to the tonic when the horn enters, which is in the... Every tenet of tonal natural law says that this is correct. Yes? Consonance, that's resolution, that's order, not this. It hasn't resolved yet to this, but we get this. It's an infinitesimal but profound disturbance in the harmonic resonance of the universe. What, in a violin section and the second French horn doing this? It's an absolutely stunning historic moment. And Beethoven's friend, Ferdinand Ries, we encountered him earlier. He was standing beside Beethoven at the very first rehearsal of this piece when they came to this section. And Ries wrote, he said, quote, "At the first rehearsal, which was horrible, but at which the horn player made his entrance correctly, and thinking that a blunder had been made, I said to Beethoven, 'Can't that damned hornist count? It sounds infamously false.' I think I came pretty close to receiving a box on the ear from Beethoven, who did not forgive that slip for a long time. Amazing. That's an actual documentation of the first time this was heard. And Ferdinand Ries, whom we've met, as I've said, he was also a composer. And so, who knows, maybe at some future episode we'll examine some of Ries's pieces. No, maybe not. Maybe not. At any rate, this is clearly a major part of Beethoven's design, because after all of this cosmic upheaval we've just come through it, things are still somewhat out of sync in a way. These two dimensions, they are slightly misaligned for a split second. And the massive sound then that comes in from the full orchestra sweeps it all away and restores order. Here is this entire passage. If you cough, you'll miss this little thing because it's so incredibly soft. Here it is. And the recapitulation is upon us, and it follows the exposition very closely, the same sequence of events. The three linking themes, the group of secondary themes, etc., but now they all stay in the tonic key of E flat major. And a coda, which Beethoven also reinvents now to balance the epic dimensions of this movement. You know, in the sonata movement, you have the three divisions, the exposition, the development, and the recapitulation, and they're all roughly equal. The coda, then, is usually very brief, but in this case, Beethoven's coda is something of a movement to itself, and it counterbalances the central development section. So we have exposition, development, recapitulation, and coda. And the coda, like the development, is something in the nature of a fantasia. So the coda now begins with the main theme in C major, and a new sprightly figure in the first violins added to it, etc., etc. And this leads to a reappearance now of that new theme, the wistful one from the development section, now in F minor. It repeats now in the key of E flat minor. Very somber. And there's something truly remarkable about this brief passage in E flat minor. It seems to look beyond somehow, out upon some vast landscape of sound. The orchestration is very full, but it's still mysterious and alluring. And maybe it's just me, but I think that Gustav Mahler definitely had this passage in mind when he wrote a certain section of the second movement of his Fifth Symphony, also in the key of E flat minor. And Beethoven's coda now continues to unfold. There's more unsettled rhythmic hemiola figures in the bass, like so. 1, 2, what? With the fragment of the triad theme over it, like so. Oh, I get it. And all of this builds and builds, but then it relaxes with this lovely, gentle, waltz-like phrase, which I want you to hear. In fact, so much of the material of this first movement, when the rhythms aren't being blown to bits by Beethoven, has the character, the swaying feeling of a waltz, which was still a new dance at the time. But in this brief passage, the music floats like so, in a regular waltz triple meter. 1, 2, 3. Very lovely. But under it, the low strings and the winds are grouped in a very laid-back sort of hemiola rhythm, like so. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And this combination of easygoing melody and gentle cross rhythms is another example of Beethoven's, what I call his dimensional writing, with melody and harmony and rhythm all operating in a slightly different layer of sound, if you will. Listen to this passage. See if you can pick it out. And you heard there our main theme in clear, unmistakable tonic E-flat major. Heroically, nobly in the French horns, as the final section of this massive first movement is now underway. And you heard the violins scurrying, dashing up and down the scale of E-flat major. And this passage now builds this magnificent arch of sound. The theme continues to repeat now in the cello and bass, and trumpets and timpani add fanfares. And the momentum of this music is now unstoppable, and it's built entirely on the main theme and the simple alternating of these two primal chords, the tonic and the dominant, the harmonic pillars of Western music. And we arrive then at a majestic sequence of new chords. It's very similar to that amazing passage of chords near the end of the first movement of the Second Symphony that I went on and on about. But look what's going on now. Along with these magnificent harmonies, we have this. Beethoven combines woodwind chords and a buoyant dance rhythm now in the brass and timpani during these chords, like so. 1, 2, 1, almost in typical Viennese waltz fashion with the accent on the second beat of each bar. 2, 1, yes. But at the same time, and this is really great, the pattern in the low strings is this, built on triads. But then it breaks into this. A new cross rhythm. It's like a reverse hemiola or something. While the timpani and brass continue in triple time. I know, it's too much for me, but this dazzling interplay, the machinery of joy, as Ray Bradbury would call it, just propels this soaring music. See if you can catch this. And did you hear that? At the very last minute, that lovely passage. That's that second linking theme from the exposition, one of the very few lyrical things in this entire first movement, and it makes a surprise appearance here amidst all of this heaven-storming grandeur. And what does this tell us about Beethoven, the Titan, the musical master of the universe, that he highlights this lovely passage so close to the end of the movement? It's terrific. And the rhythmic instability, that same pattern that collapsed the development section, now drives the rhythmic dynamic energy of the final measures. 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. And the main triad, the hemiola, is in the first violins, like so. The music has coalesced now into this massive dominant chord. 2, 3. And the primal, unstoppable force, which will, of course, as we know, resolve to the tonic E-flat major. The music now having come full circle, ending with those same two powerful chords that set it all in motion. Here now is the conclusion of the first movement.